The NDP, the last of the major parties to put price tags on some of their platform pledges. They did so over the weekend, adding up to $214 billion in new spending over the next 5 years. The big ticket promises include healthcare, universal pharmacare, and fighting climate change. To help offset those costs, the party is promising some big revenue-generating measures like, there you see it, $60 billion in revenues over 5 years through a 1% annual tax on households with wealth over $10 million. So, does it all add up? Mostafa Askari is the chief economist for the Institute of Fiscal Studies and Democracy. The group reviews platforms to see if they make fiscal sense and are affordable, but it does not endorse or comment on the merits of what's in the platform itself. And Mostafa is in Ottawa. So Mostafa, your institute has dug into the NDP's platform and you've assigned a grade. What did you come up with?
Well, they got an overall pass on the whole platform, but they got a sort of a good grade on one principle. We have 3 principles, and they got a overall pass on the second principle, and they fail on the third principle, which is transparency. We can explain why we did that, but overall, what their fiscal picture is not that much different when you look at the bottom line numbers from the other 2 parties that we have evaluated. They all 3 show a slight decline in the deficit over the next 5 years, and a slight decline in the debt to GDP ratio. But what is behind those frameworks for the 3 parties are completely different. Mm-hmm. I mean, NDP is proposing to significantly change the shape of the Canadian economy and the fiscal structure in Canada by raising significant amount of taxes and increasing the spending by $15 billion, as you mentioned.
So why don't we break that down? Let me just deal with the spending to begin with. And we talked about some of the things, universal pharmacare, dental and mental health coverage. Is the costing around those big spend elements, is that costing sound?
Well, unfortunately, they did not get all their major programs costed by the PBO, or they did and they did not use it. We don't know that. But they definitely, some of the things like the dental care and guaranteed basic income for the seniors and for disabled, those are major programs that will have significant fiscal impact over time, and they were not costed by the PBO, or it's not in the list of costing by the PBO. So that's one of the reasons in our assessment we gave them a lower score on transparency, because those things were not costed. Because what happens in those cases is those kind of cost increases over time may completely change the fiscal picture in terms of the deficit, debt, and the overall sustainability of the fiscal structure.
Okay, so let me turn to the revenue side of things, and they plan to offset all of this new spending with, a 1% annual tax on households with wealth over $10 million. That's one of their aspects. When you look at the overall revenue generation, which comes largely through tax, are these proposed measures reliable? Is the costing sound?
The costing probably are sound because the revenues are all costed by the PBO, but there are always uncertainty around those costs, and the PBO mentions those in their assessment, in their write-ups, that there are uncertainties. Something like a wealth tax, for example, has a huge uncertainty around it because we don't know how wealthy Canadians are going to respond to this, to change their behavior, change the way they allocate their funds and where they put their funds. So all those things can have a significant impact on the return of those kind of taxes over time. And definitely, they show the 5 years, the PBO shows the 5 years about $10 billion a year, but then beyond that, one can bet and be sort of, I can reassure you that those who are subject to those taxes will find a way to change the way that they pay the tax, the way that they allocate their assets, and they find a way to sort of find a way to evade those taxes over time. So So those things have to be taken into account when we look at the longer period of time.
Yeah, like if we look at France, for instance, which introduced a similar wealth tax, many wealthy French citizens simply changed their residency and so weren't subject to that wealth tax. And the French realized that this wasn't working, at least under the model they had. So they've got rid of it. They're not doing it anymore. But if I go back to the NDP model, big spending, big revenue generating measures, they're only costed over 5 years. I've only got about a minute with you left here, but what do you make of the fact that it's that timeline, 5 years?
Well, the 5 years is because the PBO only provided a 5-year baseline. So they couldn't really go beyond that if they didn't have a baseline to do the costing. So I don't think that's really important. What is important is that people like us will look beyond that 5 years and see how those things could affect the fiscal structure of Canada. And that's one of the reasons we gave them a very low mark on long-term fiscal sustainability, because they very likely, given the kind of measures that they are putting in place, the spending measures that they put in place, we're not going to have a long-term, long-run sustainable fiscal structure if we implement those programs.
Right. Okay. Mostafa, as always, appreciate you crunching the numbers and helping us understand what these platforms mean on the bottom line. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.